So, presenters, please. James and Kristen, Okay, is that one?
Oh, there we go. Okay, great. I'm going to be pretty short and to the point this afternoon. James is just passing around a handout with some key points of the report if you haven't had a chance to review it. I also have a few copies of the whole report if for those of you that may not have it, motion that started this process. I realize it was a very long time ago, so you may not remember it, or you may not have been on the committee at the time. So this report deals with the first two parts of the motion, and I'll just read it briefly. That the appropriate staff be directed to prepare a report in consultation with the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities on the following. And the first two parts are to review the current per capita status and future per capita needs of housing for all persons with disabilities in the City of Hamilton owned properties. And very similarly, to review the current per capita status and future per capita needs of housing for all persons with disabilities in privately owned or operated not-for-profit housing. So I want to start with just a couple of definitions to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. To distinguish affordable housing and social housing. So affordable housing is a more generic term that refers to the whole spectrum of modest cost housing and can be anything from affordable home ownership to full rent geared to income social housing. Whereas social housing is what is the more pure rent geared to income housing. The subsidy is provided so that a household only pays 30% of their income in rent. And to access social housing, you have to be on the access to housing wait list. So I've broken the motion down into two parts. The first is to deal with the stock of accessible housing, and the second to deal with the need for accessible housing. Some of you may be familiar with an inventory that was partially started a number of years ago, I believe on 2 separate occasions and stopped. But I think it's high time that inventory be completed. So I really don't think it's necessary to explain to you why an inventory of accessible units in the social housing stock is important, but it certainly is. One, to make people give people the information to be able to make informed choices when they are applying for social housing, to enable the best match of units to people's needs, and just to understand the number and type of accessible units. Am I too far there? Okay. In the social housing stock. So there's a recommendation in the report to direct staff to hire a consultant to complete the inventory, finally. The inventory will focus on social housing, but it will also cover affordable housing that's built with some kind of government funds. And the social housing component will be done by a consultant, and the more affordable housing component will just be done by staff. That's not quite so challenging an issue. So the second part of the motion, I think, is the housing needs of people experiencing a disability in Hamilton. And this is somewhat more challenging. There is not a lot of data for the entire City of Hamilton population, but what we do have is data from the Access to Housing wait list for social housing. So that's people who've applied and are waiting for rent geared to income housing, usually waiting for quite some time. So we were able to pull all of the data on the households waiting for social housing. Of those, 5,700 of them, at least 388 were needing at least one type of accessibility feature, and that's 6.8% of the list. in terms of building, mobility, accessibility, 348 people are waiting for units where the building itself is accessible, not necessarily the unit, which is 6.1% of the whole wait list. And then those waiting for a fully wheelchair accessible unit are 95 or 1.7%. So that's of the whole population of people on the wait list. But another way of looking at the need is relative wait times. So people who are waiting for at least one accessibility feature wait about 35% longer than others on the list. People who just need the building to be mobility accessible wait about 18% longer, but people who need a full wheelchair accessible unit wait 50% longer. So we're certainly not meeting the need, which I know is not news to any of you. So just a couple of next steps. I do need to take a short report to council just to get permission to use the money to hire someone to do the inventory. And then take a report to council on other aspects of the motion. So one is requirements for accessibility in all new social housing and affordable housing that's built with the help of government programs. We're doing reasonably well with accessibility for new affordable housing with the help of government programs. I understand that's not the case with the Stone Church project, the City Housing Hamilton, so I'm not including that in that statement. But you'll see in the report there are a couple of examples. Good Shepherd project that's underway, 30% of the units meet either building code or barrier-free design guidelines. I believe the split's about 50-50 for mobility accessibility. And they also have other features in most of their new units. Another project that's just completing, Rudy House Commons, has 22% real mobility accessible and half to building code standards and half to barrier-free design guidelines standards. And 100% of their units have other types of accessibility features. Lever door handles, outlets and controls at appropriate heights and so on. So we're not doing too badly there. But the big challenge is that affordable housing is not social rent geared to income housing. So the new housing we're seeing tends to be affordable, but not much social or rent geared to income housing is being built. So there's not that much opportunity to increase the number of accessible units in that stock. There will be some opportunities in the future. City Housing Hamilton is talking about some redevelopment. So we would have requirements in place at the time that they would redevelop, that they would have to meet barrier-free design guidelines. The province is also looking towards a more portable housing benefit rather than the rent geared to income model, which may provide opportunities and more choice for people to access housing in the private market. But I think we really need a program for modification of existing social housing units. And I can't make any promises. I would like to take a report to council developing a program like that. That's it. In the end, it's not my decision to make, but I think it's something that if we all talk about would be very helpful. So that's in essence, a quick overview of the report. Is there any questions? Or anything you want me to go into in a little bit more detail? Mary?
Because I have only been on this committee for, 18 months now, guys? I don't know whether you have ever seen the assessment tool that Kirsten's department is using to determine accessibility. I know I have the one that was done in 2010 by the university, and I'm wondering, can we see that tool at this committee to see what is missing and by a miracle why 690 Stone Church didn't work out like it should have?
Certainly, yeah. Yeah, I can bring that tool. Right now it's structured based on classification system that was handed down by the province, And it's essentially the current special needs form with the access to housing applications, but there is opportunity to note down more specifics and much more detail about the units and the area they're building and so on. But certainly I'd be happy to bring that.
Well, it just means the money would be spent more effectively rather than retrograde.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, then, Tim.
Can you tell me what are the standards for an accessible unit?
In terms of, there are two sets of standards for new builds. The one is the building code. I can't tell you, it's very extensive, so I can't give you all the details. I believe the turning radius in the Ontario Building Code is 1,500 millimeters, which I understand is insufficient. The other standard at the moment is the barrier-free design guidelines, which were approved in 2006, I believe, and the turning radius there is in the neighborhood of 1,900 millimeter turning radius, which I also understand is not sufficient. So I'm excited. I understand there is work moving forward on updating the barrier-free design guidelines, and I would like to see that as well. I think it's important. In terms of setting requirements, I can't necessarily speak to the details. You're the experts, the people doing the barrier-free design guidelines are the experts, but I can set requirements that those barrier-free design guidelines be followed, and that is the intent.
Tim and Sylvia and Kim. I said Sylvia, I meant Jane, I'm sorry. I'm Sylvia.
Okay, so,
There you go.
now it's on, okay. So, a couple of points. First off, with regard to the design guidelines, of course we have to comply with the building code. And if we're looking at what was designed in 2010 or whatever the group was that did the evaluation in 2010, that's under the old code. And there's been a number of changes to the new code as a result of AODA. So perhaps the first thing that we ought to be doing is looking at those design guidelines that are being used for any kind of evaluation and with a purpose to update those. Second piece is when the regional municipality of Hamilton Wentworth back in 1990 had its old committee, accessibility committee, one that was chaired for many years by Councillor Geraldine Copps, we created an accessible housing guide, and we assessed every not-for-profit housing provider in the city to look at what kind of accessible housing they had in those days. I don't know, does anybody know whether that guide is still around anywhere? That was done with the old Housing Help Center in those days.
What year was that, Tim?
We finished that probably around 1991. So it's quite old, but my guess is there would at least be addresses in there that would need to be, or could be, considered. Because it was looking at all the not-for-profits, Kiwanis Homes, Victoria Park Homes, you name it. All of the accessible housing programs were evaluated. And I had a third point, and for the life of me, I can't remember what it was at the moment. But
We can come
it comes
back.
back to it all.
But I think, does anybody have a question or an answer for Tim's question about where that study might be or that report?
Unfortunately, I haven't seen it. I would love to. With some direction, I can certainly check with the Housing Health Center and see what they have. If you have any other leads, I'll certainly follow them.
Yeah, it was Walter Malkowski was
Okay.
the director.
I'm sorry, Tim, I missed
Oh,
that.
sorry, Walter Malkowicz? The guy who became mayor of Burlington? Walter,
Okay.
Oh, he was an MP for a while.
Malkowski?
well, that's Gary Malkowski. I think I said
sorry.
Malkowski, but no, Walter, I think it was Malkowicz. Malkowicz, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he was mayor. So he was He was executive director of the Housing Health Center at the time.
Okay.
Jane, then Kim.
I guess I have an insight as to how critically important access to units are for the disabled. I guess I'm just puzzling here. Thank you. But I'm just puzzling here whether there's an avenue to be taken around new monies that are being directed towards social housing and the refurbishment of units, because there's quite an outstanding list of units that have received damage, and it would be practical, I would think, to put perhaps to support a priority to make those damaged units accessible units in the work that's being done. And I guess it's just sort of stressing the fact that a lot of our social housing is there to provide a roof over the head. Other things are a bit more of a luxury. But with our aging population and chronic disease on the rise, we have a greater need for accessible units. We also have a bit of a gap in the system that I'd just like to bring forward to everyone's attention, in that while wheelchairs and mobility devices are provided on their actual use. And so I'm hearing from people who are learning how to use their wheelchair within a unit that's not really designed for a wheelchair, and thus there's damage being done to those units. So I'm kind of pushing the limit on what we're covering here, but I would very much like attention to be brought to that dynamic. Thanks.
I can certainly bring that back to the people that are dealing with the refurbishment of the social housing. We've talked about accessibility with them extensively, but in terms of specific requirements, there are some challenges with some of the old stock, especially the towers, where the interior, the walls of the halls in between units are often fixed. They're often fire break units, so it can be difficult, depending on the specifics of the building, to increase the size of a unit to add to turning radius. It's possible in some, but it can be difficult, and that can be a limitation in terms of mobility, accessibility.
I think Kim and then Patty.
I'm just wondering, this research that was done is obviously done with people who are on the waiting list. What about people who need housing with disabilities, but they can't get on any list or don't know anything about? Are there any efforts being done by somebody to let people know that they can approach the city for alternative housing needs if they need it?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm sort of restricted by existing data, so I haven't been able to, I don't really have the resources to collect initial data. Something Mary and I were talking about earlier is, and it doesn't get totally to your question, but access to housing will be brought into house with the city, and there will be 2 positions created, case managers that will help people with applications and help better match them to existing buildings and so on. So I think there's some opportunity there, but in terms of the broader population, that's a real challenge.
Okay, so I guess it's left to physicians to determine and refer them to case managers at CCAC, I guess.
It's usually social workers too. Patty?
Just a couple of questions. Can you tell me what the percentage that accessible housing, what percentage that they have to meet?
Right now, It's just the building code, and I believe it's 10% of units. What I'm going to do in the future is bring new requirements for social housing and housing that is under the authority of the city.
Well,
We're working on what that.
What was the
will look like
percentage you
exactly.
said? I missed it.
I didn't say a specific percentage. The building code is 10%. Right now, there isn't a specific percentage for barrier-free design guidelines. That's something that we'll be bringing forward. We don't have a figure for you yet.
okay,
It's
and
something we can talk about.
another question is, do they have a choice in whether they're gonna follow the building code or barrier-free? Because a lot of like architects and, you know, they'll get around whatever way they can.
Yeah.
So if there's a difference between the two, they're gonna go with,
Yeah. At the moment with new social housing, they only have to follow the building code regulations. With any new affordable housing, which is more broader, tends not to be rent geared to income, but different forms of affordability, we require, generally they've been half and half. Overall, the two most recent have been, we require through the request for proposals process, and they, part of the criteria for assessing a proposal would be the number of accessible units and the level of accessibility. So we've gotten, which I think Indwell Rudy Host Commons has 22% overall. So half were to building code, half were to barrier-free design guideline standards of 47 units, so 5 of each. With Good Shepherd, they've just started on Cannon and Mary Street a project. That will be 37% either or. I believe that's half and half, but I'm not totally certain. So we're getting a little bit more in terms of the new affordable housing, but in terms of social housing, we just don't have those requirements in place yet, but I want to do so soon. And I'd also like to see the barrier-free design guidelines updated so that the standard that they are having to meet is appropriate.
I'm just wondering if there's something we can do. Like I thought on every, like, pardon my ignorance, but I thought every new builds, whether it's for housing or whatever, they have to do a check mark for following the barrier-free guidelines.
For new city facilities, yes, that's true. What we're talking about here is private nonprofit who get a certain proportion of the development cost through, it's actually federal provincial money.
So that's not considered a new build?
It is, but it's,
It's a loophole.
it's my understanding the barrier-free design guidelines don't have a specific percentage that have to meet it. So at the moment, it's been kind of negotiation of how many units meet barrier-free design guidelines versus building code.
I would think it would
Oh,
be
yeah,
cheaper to
yeah.
do it right the first time rather than do it and then have to pay for retrofit. Were you finished, Pat?
Yeah, I'm hoping someone can word it, what I'm trying to say.
Can we come
Tim.
back to that one? Well, Paula had her hand up, so we'll do Paula and Tim and then. Go ahead, Paula.
Okay, next door to me, we have a Hamilton housing home. It's just a house. It was.
Can't hear you, Paula.
Sorry. Next door to me, we have a Hamilton housing home. It's just a house, right? And it used to be an accessible house. And it's not now. It's all been torn out. And it's been made into a regular home. And Hamilton, City of Hamilton still own it. But why would you change an accessible home into a non-accessible home when there's people waiting for accessible places?
Absolutely, that's an excellent point, and I don't have an answer. That would be a decision that City Housing Hamilton would have taken. But that certainly gives me pause for thought in terms of requirements, that in no way would we be going backwards.
Because they took all the kitchen out, bathroom out, everything, and redone it all. New roof,
Wow.
everything. Anyway, just
But
just
that's helpful, yes, I can certainly add that into the requirements, and that wasn't something that there would be a need for, so thank you.
I think it would be interesting if we could get a response, like, if it's possible.
A specific response about that, certainly, yeah.
Yeah, but that shouldn't be telling people exactly.
And I'm gonna sneak in a comment before Patty and Tim do
Yeah.
anything.
Is it possible to get the address for that property so I can?
It's not mine, right?
I just need that to be able to get a specific response from them, but I can also ask the question in a general way. You know, have there been situations where you've done this, and what's the rationale?
Let me think about it, okay?
Before you leave, maybe you could ask Paul. Okay.
Yeah.
So, when I was working as a spinal cord consultant and patient navigator, it was so sad to see people who would become injured and were in a wheelchair, whether it was manual, power, whatever. They definitely had mobility issues. And so where they lived was no longer available for them. It was not at all accessible. And those that it was an accident where they got money, it took a long time for that money to come through. Those who were injured, say recreationally, there were no compensation, whatever, or designation of catastrophic, whatever. They had to depend on what is available for them. Either way, there were people being discharged within 2 to 3 months of their injury with no place to live that was accessible. We talked about this through the Hamilton Health Sciences. I've mentioned it in this group before, but there is a huge gap in services to these people. Many of them sadly end up in nursing homes, and that's very inadequate for them, well, physically as well as socially and emotionally. So I'll just leave that with you and go back to Patty and Tim.
Patty and Tim. There you go.
Okay, Tim.
Patty and Tim show. So just a couple of points. Coming back to what Patty was asking about. With respect to building code, the building code may indicate that in public housing a certain percentage has to fit the barrier-free design guidelines according to the code. And that's fine, but I think what Patty was asking is the difference between building code and barrier-free design guidelines and what trumps. So clearly building code trumps. There's no obligation on the part of any builder or anybody who's doing a renovation that has to comply with the code to do anything more than the minimum requirements within the building code itself and the barrier-free design guidelines within the Ontario Building Code. That's the max that's required. However, there's all kinds of other guidelines that go beyond building code. And I think if I understood Patty's question correctly, what we're asking, or what she's asking is, what is the city's expectation to just meet building code minimum standards, or to go a little bit above or far above and meet a higher degree of guidelines according to barrier-free design guidelines? And I think to go beyond code is certainly possible, and I think if I understood Patty correctly, again, I think that's what she's asking. It's for us to have the city go above and beyond building code when it comes to any city-owned facilities, and certainly in consultation with any private providers around their design. Perhaps attached to that, and I know there's been discussion, at least at the Built Environment Working Group, and possibly even this committee table, and there's 2 points I want to make around that. First off, and this perhaps comes back also to Paula's point, they're all kind of tied together. So first and foremost, part of the challenge with barrier-free design standard or accessible units is if you need somebody who housing, they don't need an accessible unit. Not everybody wants to live in an accessible unit if you don't need it. So part of the challenge is, and this comes back again to Paula's point, you know, Hamilton Housing or City Housing Hamilton, whatever it's called, they've got all these accessible units, individual standalone homes. And when they built Stone Church, what my recollection of the discussion with the folks from City Housing Hamilton was, they were actually going to take all of those individual accessible units and convert them to non-accessible units. And when they built that new facility on Stone Church, they were now going to put a certain number of accessible units in Stone Church, so to replace the ones that they converted to non-accessible. That's my recollection of the discussion. And so I mean, fundamentally, if we've got demand for accessible units and demand is exceeding supply, the logic of that move makes no sense, none whatsoever. So we need policy around that kind of behavior on the part of a city-run facility or a city-run service, because ultimately that shouldn't be happening. Related to that is not knowing necessarily what the demand is beyond the people who are on the waiting list. Well, you know, the federal government just took a brand new census. Maybe there's data within the new census which could be extracted to give us a bit of a different landmark or a different picture or perspective on what the demand is actually beyond the actual waiting list alone. The last point I want to make is, and again, it's all tied and it comes back to I think Patty's questions, and we talked about it again at the Built Environment Working Group and possibly even this table, to address the issue about accessibility and non-accessibility. What we could be doing and what we should be doing is in any brand new construction or in any major renovation construction, we should be putting the infrastructure to make a unit accessible behind the walls. Build it into the non-visible infrastructure so that when you need somebody who needs an accessible unit, all you have to do is go in and install all of the features and facilities in order to convert that unit to accessible with a snap of a finger. And when the person who is using it moves out and moves on, if the new people coming into a unit don't want accessible, all you have to do with the snap of your finger is go in and remove the accessible facilities that are constructed. Now, ultimately what that means is you construct a unit with wider doors and wider hallways and bigger rooms with turning radius, etc. That's great, but that's not necessarily just what makes a unit accessible. The unit has to be accessible to people who are deaf or hard of hearing, people who are blind or visually impaired, persons who use other facilities and infrastructure that are fixed to a wall but could be easily removed when they need. So if we really want to do something in a concerted way to make life easier for the building owners, the property owners, and make it easier for people with disabilities, we could easily put the infrastructure in place. And that addresses building code, it addresses barrier free design requirements, it also addresses demand for housing needs as we go on.
Can you hear me without the mic? I'm just tired of it popping. Certainly, I really appreciate the feedback about the going backwards from accessible to inaccessible. That's intolerable. So that should definitely be a key part of the requirements I'm talking to. And I really appreciate that feedback. And really, if you are aware of any other data sources, I would very much like to see them. Census data, I hope it does include more information. Often there's quite a lag between when the census is done and when we actually get data. It can be a couple of years sometimes.
But there were no questions on the short form.
There were no.
No, there wasn't. That's what I was going to say. There's no questions
They
at
didn't
all
ask
about
anything about
disability.
seniors or disabilities at all.
No. Or any mobility devices.
Yeah. Maybe on the lawn. Did
I
anyone
don't
do the
know.
lawn?
I never did the long. Anybody? No.
I hope, but yeah, there's no guarantee.
And then Mary?
In terms of long form and short form data, appreciate that they didn't ask questions about accessibility in the short form, but the government actually in the number crunchers, they actually all extract that data and they broaden it across the entire population. So even though there are people with disabilities that didn't get the long form, the data they extract from those who did becomes distributable across the entire population.
Part of the challenge with writing the requirements is to make it simple enough that it's clear to follow. So it's easy for me to say this many units need to meet barrier-free design guideline standards. I think perhaps, and I think we need to continue to talk about this, maybe the standards for those kinds of adaptable units and the adaptable features could be a part of the new barrier-free design guidelines as well. Otherwise, it's sort of left to me, or I need some set of existing standards that I can refer to in the requirements to keep it simple for council to make, to be
So
honest.
Tim, are you aware of any city that does this? Or are there any sort of samples of where this is being done?
So, sorry, to answer your question, no, I'm not aware of any particular city, but again, it comes back to the concept of flexibility. And, you know, if a person with a disability could move into any unit, anywhere, anytime, and have it easily converted at the snap of a finger to meet their accessibility needs, and then they move out, that's the flexibility you need in housing. So it means that people with disabilities that need accessible units, they don't all get ghettoized into a certain floor or a certain row or a certain column of units in a building. It's not like, you know, we designed the building and so every unit in the corner in the southwest corner of the building is you know, on every floor is an accessible unit. So it's giving people freedom to choose. And the freedom to choose is the most critical piece. It's, you know, the freedom of choice, the freedom of expression is a human right. It's a dignity. It's something that is ingrained in the Charter of Freedoms in Canada. So we have that freedom. And the problem is that most of the time the infrastructure doesn't support that charter right. So what can we do as a society to construct new buildings or renovated buildings in a way that allows the property owner the freedom to choose when they need to and when they don't need to have an accessible unit, as well as the freedom for people to choose where it is they want to live. And the only way to do that is just put the basic infrastructure behind the walls so that you can move in, create the accessibility, and then move it out when you need to move it out. I appreciate that, you know, I don't know a particular area that's doing this, Madam Chair, but you know what? Hamilton's always wanted to be on the cutting edge. Now's the opportunity.
Okay, I'm going to change the order around a little bit. I know Kim and Mary had their hands up as well, but Patty, you've got something.
Yeah, just to answer to that, I remember, I don't know who else now, but when we toured, I was just gonna say, it's up on the hill there,
Stone Church.
Stone Church, yeah. Some of the units, I forget his name, that took us around, Lattimore or something. Okay. Anyhow, what I'm trying to say is, I remember some of the units that we did look at had all the infrastructure for accessible needs that they said they would only, it's all there, but it's not installed, but they were going to install them as required. And that had to do with for the hearing and that was, we took it at the time as, you know, as this an excuse why they weren't done. But it kind of, you know, reminded me of it from what Tim was just saying about having it all done ahead of time and all, you know, you either install it or not install it as for the need of who's taking the apartment.
So why did you say was it an excuse? Because they hadn't accommodated the person living there?
Go ahead.
May make a comment.
Go
The reason given was that everything was done to code. Period, end of story. They weren't gonna do anything beyond code.
That's in the question. Okay, I just wish we had a sample so that we could even make a motion and ask council to look at that sort of package, way of doing it, because it sounds fantastic. Okay, in the meantime, I think Kim and Mary have their hands up. And Tom?
I don't know the AODA built environment standards, but I'm just wondering, is there any that way the built environment standards could over trump the building code? So I don't know that.
Yes, they can for development that the city has authority over, so social housing or housing for which we're giving some kind of financial support, and we will do that. If I may ask a question back to Tim, in terms of those adaptable units, how is my challenge is how to deal with the turning radius, and that they would all need to be large enough then to accommodate the turning radius?
So I'm going to give you just a snippet of an example. I consulted on the construction of a building at McMaster University, and this is a building that's used by folks in rehab, and they run rehab programs for people with disabilities. One of the things that I proposed to them is that when you've got a hallway with a 90-degree turn in it, that what you do is you actually cut out from the inside corner of that 90-degree turn. This is the outside corner out here. This is the inside corner here. You actually cut a 45-degree angle in the turn. So what it does is it actually allows a much easier 90-degree turn. So people are making a gradual turn around the corner as opposed to going straight up and then doing a 90-degree turn one way or another. That's just a small example of how you can design a facility to meet the needs of persons with disabilities while not impeding to any great extent the interior needs for the rest of the infrastructure itself. So again, I come back to, if you're actually creating an infrastructure where the doors are wider than your typical 30 inches or whatever it is, millimeters, I don't know, and your turning radius in a washroom is a little bit larger than the typical 1900 millimeters, or your hallways are more than your typical 32 inches, whatever that is in millimeters. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can put some basic infrastructure in your design that exceeds code. Code doesn't prevent you from going above code, it just prevents you from going below code. So, you can just look at the infrastructure and modify those things. The rest of the stuff is accessibility for people who are blind or visually impaired, deaf or hard of hearing, or the need for grab bars in particular places, because not everybody, or handrails in a hallway, like not everybody necessarily needs grab bars in the exact same place. Code says put them here, but that might not meet the needs of an individual who's occupying a particular unit. So what I'm trying to say is, hide the infrastructure behind the walls. Do what you have to do that's visible, but hide the rest of it behind the walls. Create the infrastructure so that on an individual, person by person, occupant by occupant basis, you can go in and install what you need, where you need, without having to do a great deal of additional construction. Does that kind of make sense? I'm not sure if I'm making it clear.
I
Or there's
understand
still
what you mean.
questions.
I just wish there was an example.
And if I could add to that, I think there needs to be a program to make those, to fund those modifications. Even,
But it's not modifications. It's the actual construction itself. Then when the individual needs to come in and they need the grab bars, or they need the handrails in the hallway, or they need an FM system, or an emergency call system if they've fallen and can't get up or whatever. all of the infrastructure is already there. It's just a matter of the actual equipment itself is, and those things, they have to be funded anyway. They have to be provided by the property owner. That's a requirement. So,
Kim might have an example.
For example, for a grab bar, you just need extra piece of 2-inch plywood behind the wall. That's all you need. Like just certain things like that. Or say if you want, if you want central vac in your house, you just need the infrastructure to have it there. So you just plug it in if you need to. Just things behind.
You can get adjustable cupboards too, like top cupboards that you can just up and down, right? Same with bathroom cabinets. Same thing, you could have them that are like floating, right? But you can have them moving up and down so that you can get your knees underneath and things like that. So there's all ways of doing things that are out there.
I just want to go back for a second to what Patty said though. So there was a person living in a unit on Stone Church that was still waiting for the modifications to happen.
They needed all the modifications. Like if someone needs a wheelchair accessible, they don't need the systems for hearing or for, right? But they were there in case the next person that was in there,
They needed it.
yeah, and they could be easily hooked up. Yeah, yeah, and that was on Stone Church, the units.
Tom?
And then
Mary.
just for an example, and I'd like to come back and make another comment. We made the point, and this is if the wiring is there for a hearing impaired person over the door, when a fire alarm goes off, so that there's a light that flashes, that wasn't available in any of the units. If it's pre-wired, it doesn't have to be there, it's there. That's just.
Yeah.
If I could comment, I think this is a lot of the detail that really needs to be in the very pre-designed guidelines so that I can say you need to follow these guidelines. I don't have the expertise to be able to make the specifics. I think that needs to be through a broader process that you're a part of.
I'm sorry?
Can we make a motion?
Sure, you can make a motion.
So do we have it?
I just wish that we had like a document or, do you know what I mean? Or where to get this information, other than saying, well, this is what we'd like. If there was something substantial that we could pass on. Yes?
I guess what I'm really recognizing is that we don't have good stats that way. And I'd like to bring it back to how they've determined the need on the second page here. And that is,
Jane?
yes.
Mary's had her hand up for a while. Do you mind if Mary speaks and then we come back to you?
Sure.
Okay. I just feel bad. She's been waiting for about 5 minutes.
Well, in a way, it's a personal story, but it goes back to your connection with the rehab center and Paula's with a private home changing. When I came to the city, I could not find a wheelchair accessible apartment, but eventually I found a house that I was assured could be modified for my needs. Fortunately, I had a bank manager who said she would add whatever the renovation costs were onto the mortgage and remortgage the house. That applies to the people coming out of the rehab center, if it can be done. I did what Tim has been suggesting in doing the modifications. Everything was put in place so that the next person who moved in might change whatever needed to be changed, but my chair only needs a 4-foot turning radius, not a 6-foot like some of them do. When I had to move out of my house, it was a case of the person said, oh, they would take advantage of all the accessibility features I had put into it. Inside of 6 months, they had ripped the ramp off the front of the house and stuff. But from Kirsten's point of view, whoever the city inspector was, because of course we had to have a permit, So it was December 91, as near as I can remember, that it happened. So they could see, because we went over and above code at that time to get the needs that I had. But the sad thing is, like Paula's case, as soon as somebody bought the house, I don't know what they did inside the house, but I know what they did outside the house. Somewhere along the line, I would like to see a motion made that no house that has been modified can be sold without the permission of somebody who knows what the waiting list is like. Like whether it's the case of the city buying the house because it's modified for people who have a disability. In my case, we tried to list it with the Hamilton Real Estate Board. No, what was it, Hamilton Burlington? Anyway, it didn't work out because the person who bought it wasn't honest and it fell apart from there. Anyway, what I'm saying is it can be built in. And I know it was built in, and whoever the city inspector was. But we were using the drawings from a book that I had from CMHC, which I still have, so that I could try to dig it out for you personally if you wanted. Because I know I was referring to it when we were doing the housing thing for the seniors, whether we would put it into the seniors book or not. I got permission from Ottawa to do so.
So Mary, just a quick question. Was that housing, Hamilton Housing, or was that your private dwelling?
It was private.
Okay, so maybe we can continue talking about that at built environment rather than here, because this is more to do with city housing, right? It's just, I'm looking at the time, we spent quite a lot of time on this.
Well, the only thing is, I would like to see a motion that if, as Paula says, a house lost its features, like mine did, somebody has to stop it before it happens.
So let's take it to built environment and work through that committee.
Okay.
So I'm back looking at table 3 and the breakdown of the housing wait list as requiring a accessibility feature. And I know the housing wait list is a bit old. And we're also told that, you know, they're waiting 35 to 50% longer for getting, because of what their needs are. I'm also aware that we have such a variety of housing. Principally, a couple of buildings not far from here. Very few of which have accessibility features from my own understanding. And yet a lot of those adults are there because they've experienced an accident, a brain injury, are aging without resources, suffer from chronic illness and disease. In fact, I'm hard pressed to think of an individual in any of those units that doesn't fall into one of those categories. So I think it's a bit of a rare circumstances where we have almost total housing buildings with almost every person that would fall into needing some type of accommodation. And yet, while the numbers and the statutes provided are good, it doesn't present that whole picture that right now we have concentrated populations in old infrastructure where the need is growing. You can move in there and within months have a need for a mobility device. So you can get a move or you can get a renovation, but seldom does it match the real needs of a client. So I'm just throwing it out there that getting a complete picture of real needs is a bit more complicated than some of the breakdown offered here. And that the stats are rapidly aging with the wait list. And the needs of people are going up exponentially within that wait time. Other factors drive the need for those accessibility devices. For example, you know, people are actually getting scooters perhaps a bit earlier than they need to, simply because their options for transportation are significantly narrowed on OW and other social assistance. So you have a variety of things that are driving the need for accessibility and accessible units. And again, just putting it out there that I don't think we're getting a really good picture of some of this.
I just want to circle back about inventory for accessible units. We had a very robust discussion about this at Built Environment several years ago, that the 10% of the inventory be accessible, we thought was very inadequate. Through this committee, we recommended that it be make it 15%. Fortunately, we don't have any empirical data, so perhaps, Madam Chair, we can at some point get city staff to find out exactly the number of units, particularly the number of clients that are requiring accessible units, because it was our understanding at the time that 10% was woefully inadequate.
Especially with seeing 50% longer waits. I mean, what does that translate to in months or years?
The average wait right now is 2.9 years, so we'd be looking at over 5 years.
And I'm talking about people that are newly injured who need something
Yeah.
yesterday.
The whole housing system is in shambles, really. There's so much need.
So that I'm just asking that we just be kept in the loop with regards to finding out about what the inventory is and what it needs to be. Please, we have a lot of input.
And please, if you learn of data sources, please give them to me.
Certainly.
I need to be able to back up the numbers with the data, and as you said, what I have here is not adequate.
Tim?
It's just a question. Did the province not enact some sort of regulations or legislation pertaining to the municipality giving the right to require private residential owners, property owners, to allocate a proportion of their housing to social housing or geared income or rent-supported housing? Other province has something that maybe not. I don't know.
It's in that new housing strategy.
Yeah, it's a new bill 204 called the Promoting Affordable Housing Act, and it's called inclusionary zoning. And it's gone through first reading at the provincial level, and we're expecting it to be approved. It hasn't yet. It'll take a couple of years to roll out and figure out some of the details. And that legislation is enabling, so it's up to council to decide whether or not we implement it in Hamilton. Yeah.
And so it goes on and on. Is there anything we can do to help you?
There are two things. I would love more data. And if there's any way you can sort of work towards having the barrier-free design guidelines updated sooner, that would be very helpful.
We would like to see a priority for retrofitting or new builds for the number of accessible units to be higher, much higher in fact, than the current ratio provided. Is that a meaningful type of motion proposal?
Yeah, I'm not sure what to do with that, mainly because Built Environment has been reading and talking about this. Are you on the Built Environment?
No, That's good.
So I'm gonna turn to people that have been on that committee
It's-
for a long time, yeah.
It's been done,
It's
yes.
been done?
Yes.
And it's
on
going
the
to
ATP.
council?
Yes.
And do you remember if we got a response or something?
No,
Received.
that's all we got was received, yes, by council.
Do you remember how long ago that was? Okay,
6 years.
It's going to be a long time then.
6 years. People die on
Yes,
the
we-
street
we'll have,
waiting for
but
hours.
Jane makes a good point. I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Yep.
I'm not taking
So
proper
on-
procedure. It should be revisited, obviously.
Here today or at built environment?
Built
That's-
environment.
Okay.
And the
Alright.
barrier-free guidelines should be, something should be done with that. Can we do a motion for that?
Tim has his hand up, let's see what he's saying.
Yeah. Or even ECP.
So, I'm gonna make a motion, Patty's going to second the motion, that
Ooh.
pursuant to today's discussion with Kirsten related to issues respecting accessible housing for persons with disabilities. I don't know, Lorraine, if you're catching all this.
I'm listening.
ACPD requests that council put forward the resources necessary to have the City of Hamilton's barrier-free design guidelines updated.
Hold on.
Updated,
Yes?
effective immediately. And those guidelines include requirements for accessible housing,
Hold on.
requirements.
I'm still at guidelines.
Those guidelines include
Include, yes?
requirements for
Yes?
accessible housing
Yes?
within city-owned or within city-owned or operated facilities, public housing facilities, I guess. And,
Hang on. Yes? A little hand's going like crazy.
where applicable,
Yes?
the private sector. Period. Pursuant to today's discussion, whereas pursuant to the whatever.
But I've got the important bit.
But do we have any input into this? ACPD?
Into what?
Into the barrier-free guidelines?
Okay, go ahead.
We've been working with Access and Equity for almost 2 years now, trying to get all the departments together. I don't know what the holdups are, but for updating the barrier-free guidelines. So
If I may. So Patty, so you've been working with that group?
Well,
with
the built
Access and-
environment,
yeah,
And-
built
oh, sorry,
environment.
Built environment.
Yeah.
That's what we're
Working
doing.
group has been working with Access and Equity to get,
Yeah. And they're involving a lot of the different departments throughout the city, so, and community involvement.
So how do we deal with that in the motion, Tim? And as well, what, are we going to address anything to do with making changes? Or just the barrier-free upgrade for now?
I think
I see
the
your
pur-
hand, Barry.
the purpose of this motion is to ask council to put the resources forward to update the guidelines.
Okay.
And if there's been efforts over the last couple of years to get them updated and that hasn't happened, then we need to move on. So that's the purpose of the motion. Coming back to Paula's question, if we want to, and Patty's in agreement, we could put a second point in there that ACPD needs to be consulted throughout the entirety of the process.
Definitely.
if I may, can I read out what I've written?
Sure, and then you can
That the ACPD requests that council puts forward the resources necessary
for the City of Hamilton to update barrier-free guidelines in consultation with, I think I need to change the beginning, but in consultation with the ACPD effective immediately, and that those guidelines include requirements for access to housing within city-owned and operated housing facilities, and where applicable, the private sector.
And that new piece, that needs to be issued.
Should I put it?
I've
put it in the beginning.
Already. Okay, moved by Tim, seconded by Patty. All right, any discussion, questions? Mary? Is it related to this motion?
Yes, I want to make a friendly amendment in that I've been talking to people in Public Works now for several years, and they say until it says standards as versus guidelines, many of the contractors will ignore the provisions made.
Okay, so do you feel you need to change the wording in that motion?
It may need to be an addendum.
The problem is the city doesn't have the right to create standards. The city has only the right to create guidelines. The province or the federal government create the standards. I hear what you're saying, Mary, and that has been part of discussion of built environment in the past. What I would suggest is get the guidelines done first, and then deal with the adoption and the application of those on a separate level. Deal with it after the fact.
Right. Any other comments or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anything opposed? Unanimous. Carried. Thank you. Okay, you asked for help, we're trying.
We're trying.
Thank you very much.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
for the presentation and for keeping us up to date. All right, motion to receive the presentation.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Moved by Paula, seconded by Patty. All in favor?
Aye.
Carried, thank you. I'm going to digress for half a moment. Some of you may have heard that we have been asked if we're going to meet in July and August. And our guest in the wheelchair tried to leave and her wouldn't work. It's kind of getting annoyed.
Oh dear.
Anyway, so we have been asked yet again this year if we would consider not meeting in July and August. I've spoken to some of you. Everyone I spoke to said, no, we need to keep meeting in July and August. Is there anyone here that would not be attending in July and August? Because it's absolutely imperative, or we are wasting our time and our support time, etc. So I'm going to ask again. Mary, could you listen for a moment, please? I'm asking if anyone is not able to meet in July and August. Are you able to meet in July and August? Well, I think it's always the second Tuesday, right? All right, so then, do we need a motion to meet in July and August? Okay, so we will just direct Lorraine to know that we will be meeting in July and August. Sorry, thank you. Okay, we're going to go back to the agenda now, and we're going to look at the minutes, I guess. Approval of minutes?
Yes.
That's one. Does anybody have any comments on the minutes? Patty?
I do, yeah, I was just noticing in the minutes, page 6, Access and Equity, Maxine, we were supposed to have a presentation at this meeting regarding the complaints received respecting disability issues coming through Access and Equity.
Yes.
That's been requested for a few months now, and it wasn't on the agenda,
Yes.
so I don't
Let's
know.
put it on the agenda for July.
We'll move it to July.
Let's
Something,
absolutely
like,
put it on the agenda, regardless if somebody says it's ready or not.
yeah.
Other than that, are there any other comments or amendments needed for the minutes? Okay, so I need a motion to approve the minutes with that change. I guess it's not a change.
Not a change.
It's not a change.
Okay,
But thank you for bringing it up again.
Paula moved it, and a seconder, Kim. Seconded by Kim. Motion carried. Everybody's nodding their head. I should do it for them, okay. All in favor? Aye. Carried. Thanks. Okay. Transportation meeting.
Notes for April 16th.
Yep.
Is there any changes, anything missing from the transportation meeting minutes? If we have to go through it all, it takes too long.
I think we're gonna focus, Lauren is gonna go through the recommendation.
You have one recommendation.
Yes, please. Was that it?
It's April 26th.
Yes.
Yes, there was one.
Thank
Why
you.
don't you just read it?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Consultation with the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities on the staff report respecting a 3-year pilot program for a 100% on-demand accessible transportation system operated by the taxi industry. Shall I read it the rest?
Is that enough, or do we have to hear all of it?
I can read the resolution part, that the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities be included in the consultation on the staff report respecting the feasibility of moving to a 100% on-demand accessible transportation system, and that the consultations with the Advisory Committee include the design, implementation, and evaluation of the pilot project.
And there's no date as to when this should start?
There is no date.
Okay.
Did it go to council?
It has not gone yet,
Because we have to approve it.
that's right, it has to be
Okay,
approved.
so
That's right.
Okay, so who's that moved by?
That was moved by Tim and Eske.
Okay, so Tim's not here. Does somebody else want to just move the motion?
I'll move.
Tom, seconded by Paula.
Yeah.
I think we had a second recommendation. My
Should we do
apologies.
both at once?
Was there a second? Also by Tim and Eske. Consultation by the Hamilton Street Railway staff with the ACPD. That the ACPD requests that council direct the HSR to consult the ACPD on all matters related to accessible transportation, including but not limited to service delivery, policy development and implementation, revision of complaints process, and proposed new vehicle design.
Okay. So we'll say that's from, who did I say? Kim? No, Paula and Tom.
Sure, I'll take it, but how about somebody else? Come on, somebody.
Well, we're
Doesn't
gonna
matter.
put it together.
That's it, it's not- I know,
We'll put
I'm-
it together, so
yeah.
Tom and Paula.
Yeah, sure, I'm good.
All right,
Thank you,
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that's carried.
Okay.
So,
So anything changed? There's nothing in the minutes, right, that anybody wants to change or add or in the transportation for April?
go ahead.
No.
Did you have any discussion through all this about Uber being involved?
There's been some discussion on Uber.
There was about the money being.
With accessible transportation?
Yeah, well,
Pilot project.
no,
The money was supposed to go,
not as accessible, Uber.
no, I know, but the money should go to providing more accessible taxis.
That came before group reform.
I guess
Yeah,
it's a
that
tax.
came before the group before. But as in, if you're asking about accessible Uber cars, nothing's been
Okay. Did you mean accessible?
Yeah.
signed. Yeah.
Madam Chair. Uber's not part of our purview.
No, it's not.
It's not funded by the city, so.
It's private.
But it does affect the licensing and taxi.
It will when they're licensed, yes. I'm sorry.
They're not licensed
If
yet.
they are,
Yes,
Yes.
there's a big thing going on with that.
yes. So can we?
But, yes, we will, it obviously has to be kept on the radar.
Yes. Anybody else? About the minute? Yay, nay?
Looks good.
There we go.
So Paula, you moved the report,
I do.
seconded by Bob. Oops. This is great, lots of people.
I know, they're all holding their hands up for change.
Bob, okay.
Okay, seconded by Bob, all in favor? Aye. Carried, thank you. Built environment.
We do not have those minutes.
Right.
Maxine's not here, so I will go to July meeting.
Okay. So the next three things, I'm going to do a little report on this on my own. But jump in, any of you guys that meet with us. So we made a monumental decision today. From now on, we are only going to meet at 2 o'clock prior to ACPD meetings. So Lorraine, if you could, who does the room bookings?
Maxine.
Could you inform her? Okay, she'll see this. So every
Oh, I see.
second Tuesday, when we have ACPD meeting, we will have that other group meet, and we will cover whatever we need to cover at that time. Instead of having 3 separate meetings, we will talk about integrated standards, the work plan, and in terms of reference, I think we'll take care of today. Did you have your hand up, Paul?
Yes, the only thing she has to change is the time. The room's been booked for the year.
Okay, but we should cancel
It's
the other.
2:30. I never booked the other ones.
Okay,
I think it was only this one. I used to call Maxine to book the other one.
okay, so we'll change the time.
So the time needs to change to 2 instead of 2:30.
And just so that you know, the people who come to this meeting regularly are Paula, Tom, Mary, Bob, Tim, and myself.
Yes.
Terry.
Terry, of course.
Oh, Terry.
And Terry. All
If
right.
anybody else wants to come.
All right, so that's for all 3 of them. As far as integrated standards work, I was hoping that Maxine was going to give us an overview or an update on the work with the Chamber of Commerce to bring
She
more.
did, actually.
But there's still nothing concrete.
No, they won't do it next year. They
It's
want to
next
do it
year,
with us
yeah?
next year. She did tell us that at the one where we didn't have the quorum. And the gentleman from Tim Hortons, I believe he is coming to do a presentation at the end of this year, November, is it? October, November.
So she's the one that's been involved contacting
Yeah.
her. So I think
And-
she needs to
and
give us
if-
an update.
We have to go to him though, he won't come to us.
Okay, well, whatever it is, okay,
She has the information anyway.
right.
It was, she told us verbally when you weren't here and there was not a quorum, so.
Can I ask what you're talking about?
Integrated standards, we were looking at, so some of us went to a conference last year about the AODA in Burlington. And a gentleman named Mark Wafer, who makes a practice of hiring people with disabilities, spoke. And it was very inspiring and very well presented. And we thought it might be a good idea to bring him to Hamilton.
Yeah?
And address not just our group, but all agencies that work with people with disabilities, human resources, maybe in the city and other organizations. But we wanted to make it like, bring it to Hamilton.
Is this in process?
It's in process. Unfortunately, it seems to be lagging. It's not moving forward very fast. Something, yeah?
Lorraine has to.
Is there a group working on this?
Yes.
And not depending on access and equity?
I think we are depending on access and equity.
Well, the reason being is because it was gonna be a cost and we don't have any money.
Actually, the whole thing started with, at our meeting, Cindy was there, and she felt that this would be put together by the community
Yes.
as a partnership, and that's
And
sort
it was-
of when access and equity became the lead in it. So that's how it started, that's where it's at. Yes, Tom?
Madam Chair, it's being done in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
So the Chamber of Commerce, and we get all employers involved in this.
And actually Maxine does have the information, but it was given to us last month when there wasn't a quorum, so it's not in the minute.
That was in March.
Was that in March?
March or April.
Oh, was it really?
April,
Well,
that's
then
it.
anyway, that's where she had the information, didn't she?
Can I read my update from the April meeting?
Yeah, see?
Proposal to Hamilton Chamber of Commerce for an event respecting employment opportunities for persons with disabilities. Maxine Garner advised that she has been in communication with the Chamber of Commerce and Mark Wafer of Tim Hortons. Mr. Wafer will be speaking in Hamilton on October 18th, 2016. Maxine is awaiting information regarding the speaking engagement to be passed on to members of the ACPD. So you should ask Maxine for an update on that.
That's what I asked. I thought she was going to be able to do it tonight. Okay, just moving along, we were also looking at having a forum with transportation, i.e. wheelchair transportation other than darts, like taxis. And we wanted to bring them around a table and speak with a gentleman whose name is it Lisa? And just to have like a transparent discussion of why things aren't moving along, why don't we have more wheelchair taxi licenses being given out this year, and what are the issues, what are the problems, why are there never enough taxis when you want them? And I don't know where that is. I think that one as well, Maxine was working on. So I was hoping that she would be here today to give us an update on that as well.
I can give you something.
Sorry, Paula.
I can give you something.
Give me something.
Yes, I did call
All of
both.
us something.
I did call both of those taxi owners, and they're more than willing to come anytime you want them. And
I know
so
they
is the
said
guy
that to
from
me
licensing.
But the problem is that Maxine was going to set it up, and at this point, it hasn't been set up to my knowledge. And
Oh, because I think I said I would do it. And I was waiting for direction.
I don't think you were going to do it. Maxine had to do some stuff around timing and when people are available. Anyways, if we could just make a note that Maxine needs to give us an update on this, I would appreciate it. And the third thing, we had other things discussed and still coming up with the work plan working group, but that focus was our main sort of first directive, so that's why I presented that one. And then we were doing the terms of reference. Maxine did give me the revised terms of reference, and everybody got a copy
No.
today.
Mary, it's too small.
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
No,
I've got one here.
always I didn't get it, they're right
It's a small
there.
print for you.
Oh.
Oh, you did get it
I
today?
think it is in large print.
That's up for Mary?
Oh, it got under my file, guys, so.
Yeah, so Mary, it's the same as what you had with those changes we talked about today.
Oh, okay.
There's more here if you need it. So does everyone want to have a quick look at that?
Yeah, got in my file.
Some of it is in writing because we had to add it today. Tim,
Pardon me?
other Tim.
Oh, well,
For those of us who can't look at it, can we please have it sent out and have a discussion next time?
Sure.
Have it
Send it outside.
typewritten and sent out as a text document, please.
Okay.
I will ask Maxine for that, yes.
And she has to get the amended ones that we have. And then the last thing that we have been working on is the survey. Did everybody receive a copy of that? And again, that was emailed out to everyone according to Maxine.
It was. Ages ago, actually.
Okay, so it was in order to identify if we wanted refreshments, if people needed reimbursement for parking or HSR tickets or darts tickets. So it was like a survey to find out who needed what. And it's really important that people fill this out and return it. And actually, I'm going to ask if people could fill it out and return it to me in the July meeting, because that way I can make sure it goes through. Because right now I'm finding things are not.
This was months ago, was it
Yeah.
not?
But it wasn't, apparently only one person filled it in and sent it back. So I'm asking you personally today.
Is there an extra copy? Because I didn't get one.
We should have got one
Today.
with you today with your
Tim
thingy.
Murphy brought it to you.
Well, again, I'll need help finding it.
You'll need one?
Help them out.
It's right there on top.
just say the survey.
One copy?
That's
Does
fine.
anybody else need the survey?
What is it, like done the writing copy, it's not gonna be online? What
It was already emailed out. I don't,
Oh, she said the magic word, it was emailed out. I don't get emails.
no, but that's why I'm giving it today.
Thank you.
Only because like only one person responded. So if possible, I would really appreciate it if people would fill that out and bring it to the July meeting, or if you want, fill it out today, leave it with me. I'm just feeling that perhaps Maxine is really busy and I'd like some of this stuff to move forward.
Yes.
This one, the accessibility.
That's an access and equity form that we've asked several times.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is the survey.
Yes, this is the survey. Okay?
Yep.
Any questions on what I've talked about? Okay. So, it's not a perfect survey. I think if you could fill it out and return it, that would be great. Survey on 7.1, or that was the presentation?
7.1 is not happening.
Oh, we are moving on to,
We can't do that because it's here.
okay. So we are tabling 8.1. That was a Maxine report, and she's not able to be here today. 8.2, we dealt with discussion. Yep. 8.3, ATS performance report ending December 31st, 2000.
Should that not go to transportation?
Let's see. So, I think the transportation review group needs to review this, and then we can bring it back to ACPD. So can I have a motion to refer this to TWIG,
Yes,
as we affectionately call it?
I'm
Tim?
Twig.
Moved
Yes.
by Tim, seconded by
Me.
Paula. All in favor? Carried. So we'll see that come back to us after the twigs have looked at it. I am a twig, so I can say that.
We are Twigs.
I am a twig. 8.4 was the complaint form that we've been asking for a couple of months. I think Mary was the one that noticed there was a complaint form for access and equity, and we just wanted to see what the form looked like. So we will wait for that, and we can put it on next month.
Yes.
List of Maxine.
I think Maxine built that.
It wasn't a form,
No.
a lot of people weren't there, so
No.
we need to do it.
I don't think we can discuss that.
I have a note on that. Maxine advised that the presentation will come to ACPD in June, which will now be July.
Yeah.
That will include staff from several departments, so she's gathering up some staff as well.
So now it'll be July,
It will be July.
and maybe we can make sure that's back on the agenda.
Yes, absolutely.
And will that be like a presentation or?
I'll talk to Maxine about how she's going to bring it.
Awesome.
I
We
have
to
it
be
under,
in July, there's too much waiting.
and I have it currently under discussion, so I'll talk to Maxine.
Thank you. 8.5. I received a resignation from Jeff Galbraith, and I thought that we had to move to accept it, but Lorraine has informed me that we do not need to. We've sent him a letter accepting it. I don't know if there's anything to discuss about this.
The committee needs to just approve the resignation, that they've seen it and received it.
Yes, Tom?
Is there a process to replace him?
We're gonna talk about that next.
Yeah?
So I guess we'll move to approve his resignation. I can't move the rest of the moving.
Me and Tom.
Seconded by.
Me.
It's painful to do.
Oh, yay!
All in favor?
I'll take the hit.
Okay. There's also another member that has not been coming to the meetings. We've sent a note to her to try to clarify whether or not she will be joining us. once we get a response from her, I believe Lorraine is going to then take the question to the selection committee, whether or not they wish to replace those two people. And I asked Lorraine if we can make recommendations about this. And so, does anybody want to discuss what we might say to the selection committee? Do we want to encourage them to replace these two people? Do we know people in the community that might? Yes, Tom?
I have one, I'm not sure the procedure. It may help with quorum if we have a few, if we have one less person on the committee.
Quorum will shrink.
Quorum will shrink.
Yes.
That's automatic.
That's automatic.
Yes.
I also know that, as for Lorraine's direction on this, I understand that there are other people, there are people that have already been interviewed,
Yes.
right, at the initial selection process, and the selection committee will probably just go down.
They may choose to.
They may choose to do that. I'm just,
Would you like to recommend that they do that?
no, well, it's a,
If we can make a recommendation, I'm
please,
just asking.
yeah, I have an opinion on it, but I'd like to hear everybody
Okay.
else on it.
Tim?
The method by which the selection committee would reappoint or appoint any new person is fundamentally theirs. I think the only message we need to send to the group is we either do or we do not wish to replace the resignations. We leave the process up to them.
We
So-
could recommend where there may be a gap, what we might identify as a gap in terms of representation, and it's an open discussion.
Yeah, that is really what I wanted to address is, I think they were bringing a particular sector to the table. And I have a concern that sector might be mental health and that,
I think we have mental health representation here.
Yeah.
I think we do. I
Where?
think if there is a gap, it might be special needs or hearing. Tom?
And it doesn't preclude us from advocating for those folks. We may not have the expertise, but there are a number of us around the table that have been here long enough to
It's
know
not- yeah.
the needs. So it doesn't preclude us from advocating. We certainly like the input. And if I may add one more thing, we've only had one, blessedly, we've only had one meeting we haven't had quorum.
Yeah.
Yes. So, bring somebody else on.
Yep.
And new voices are always welcome.
So it's not our practice to identify what disabilities each person around the table has. Right?
Right.
Okay. So is anyone interested in asking if we should have someone with a hearing disability or special needs or anything? Should we just leave it up to them?
It's their prerogative. I mean, if you want to make a recommendation, sure, but it's the selection committee's prerogative, as far as I understand.
So if I understand, okay. Tim?
How do we know that even the selection committee knows?
They don't know yet.
Well, you can't ask. Fundamentally, I think we have to leave it up to the committee to just determine who they think is the best fit. And if it happens to be somebody with a disability, terrific. If it happens to be somebody who doesn't have a disability, so be it. I think that takes us down a bit of a slippery slope pathway.
All right. So if I hear the committee properly, then what we will do is just recommend that they replace the two people once we get a response from the second person who has not been coming regularly. Did you have a question, Patty?
Yes, I know of Jeff, but who's the second?
Aaron?
She came for about the first 2 or 3.
Do you guys remember Aaron?
Yes, Erin, she
I
was,
forget her last name. What was her last?
she was absent she was on mat leave for a while as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that right? We're going to employ them once we get a response. All right, so now general information. Oh, is Maxine going to do this general information too? I think we're just gonna have a Maxine agenda next month. I hope she's
Tied to a chair.
I just hope she's here. Okay. So
should
we
go on
added a
vacation.
few things. 11.2. Okay, Paula, you're on.
Okay. I'm gonna hate doing this. I have been asked if I would be a liaison between ACPD and DARPS.
Who asked? Sorry, who
You can
asked?
say Mark Lindorf.
Okay.
And as I am a regular DARPS user, and I am not on the board of directors, he thought I might be a good candidate to do that.
Well, also your chair of transportation.
Yeah, and
You're
he
the
would
chair of
like,
the twins.
yeah, and he said I had to ask you guys if you approved of that, or whether you have any comments on that. I have nothing against anybody else. I mean, he just asked me to do it, but I mean, I can just tell him what I think. I don't care. I can find out any information we need.
So I think
I know
that's-
Tim's on the board.
Paula, I think what might be important for the committee to hear is, how will this work? Will you have like meetings with them or casual phone calls? Or just, how will this work? Will you go to board meetings and take notes?
Apparently, from what he's told me, any information that this committee wants from him,
Mhm.
I would email him and he would send it back and I would send it out to everybody. He also said he would invite me to the occasional DARTS board meeting.
Yeah, you'll pick and choose.
Of course I would, yeah, which is fine. And I will be asked to leave when there's anything confidential.
And is
Which
there
I know that.
anything that we are reciprocating? Like, is he asking you for any information?
Well, if it's a liaison, I guess, if we have anything to ask him, I guess we ask him, right?
No, I meant the other way around. Is he expecting you
Something from
to
you.
inform him?
No.
about this? Okay.
Yeah. We don't, because he gets nothing from me, so be careful because he might be.
No, you won't get anything from him.
Okay.
Tom, you have a question?
Yes. Are we not supposed to be an arm's length? I'm sorry.
Tim?
Oh, I don't like that green. Here.
What did you
Very,
say?
very interesting.
You couldn't see, Mary.
It's interesting that this question is coming forward because at the presentation, Mark Mindorf and Jessica, the chair, said very clearly that they already have representation
Yeah.
from the board on ACPD.
I know,
So,
Yeah.
hang on a minute, what part of that equation don't I get?
I don't know.
So the second part
He's a
is,
charmer.
if he's looking to improve
Do
communications,
you want something?
if he's looking to improve communications between DARTS as a contractor to the city, we've already been told very clearly that has to go through ATS. So there's nothing formal we can do. Paula wants to be a conduit on an informal basis. That's Paula's decision, but she can't be acting on behalf of ACPD because we've already taken a motion on these things and we've already had discussion with city staff very clearly that any kind of formal relationship must go through ATS. Otherwise, the executive director of DARTS would be coming to the TWIG meetings on a regular basis. And that's the method by which the communication between DARTS and ACPD should actually be taking place, as has already been declared. So fundamentally, to even ask the question is inappropriate from the executive director of DARTS.
Can I just give you some background information?
If I also may, on this, just the final point is, and this has been posed to the executive director and the board of DARTS on an ad nauseum basis. If they want to hear from people with disabilities, add them to your board. But, you know, DARTS is an organization whose only purpose for being in business is to support people with disabilities, to provide service to people with disabilities. They don't even have one person in their office who has a disability. There isn't a staff member in the organization that can bring forward the agenda or the issues or information. And there's been an active exclusion on the part of the board to bring people with disabilities to the board. So I think that organization needs an attitude shift before they start coming to ACPD looking for a conduit to DARTS as an organization.
Okay, as a little bit of a background though, at Transportation Committee, we've been asking for information, numbers from Owen, and it's been very difficult to get them. So Paula on her own called Mark, and he very easily, quickly, and willingly gave her the numbers she wanted. And that's where it started from. Not so much as Paula to liaise with DARTS, as for Paula to be a person that might be able to get numbers directly from Mark or DARTS, because we're having trouble getting these numbers from Owen. Tom?
That should be done through proper channels. We don't need to go through back channels to get it. It's got to be done.
I just wanted to clarify
Yeah,
how
that's
this
fine,
started.
and I appreciate it. And, you know, we appreciate getting the information. Not as much as everybody else has been frustrated by not getting the information. That's not the way to do it.
Ask him to hire you, Paula.
No, thank you.
Oh, why not? Come on. Say
Okay.
come on.
No, I
So
wouldn't
then-
even go on the board. So,
Mary, yes?
For the last, 3 years, I think, I've been on the TWIG, the Transportation Subcommittee, working
We
group,
know what
whatever,
it is.
as a representative from the Seniors Advisory. It's getting very convoluted because in the past I was on it the same way, but I took a leave of absence. For the last time, each year they want figures, and as you say, we haven't been getting figures out of Owen, so that they know how the breakdown is for seniors. So that sort of secrecy, and I put my questions several times in black and white and given them to Owen, and nothing comes back, or it comes back convoluted. So I've given it all to Paula that I've had in the past, and she's going to try to put it into a one-pager that I should have been able to give to seniors each year. It's not happening yet. So because she's been asked to be a liaison, I don't know whether it will facilitate it or not, but as far as I'm concerned, as chair of the Transportation Working Group, she should be able to get these answers without being a liaison.
Okay, and so listening to what committee members said, here's what I think we should do. I think we should talk about this at the Transportation Working Committee with Owen present, so that he understands the dilemmas and the difficulties we're having when we keep asking for reports and numbers and we're not getting it. And perhaps he can help us problem solve how ATS can be more fruitful or whatever, responsive to our requests. Even the reports, like the complaints reports, we wanted them, what did we say? We used to get it quarterly, and we've now asked to get it every 6 months. And for some reason, there's still resistance to give us that. They just want to give it to us annually. So what do you think? We'll talk about this at the Transportation Committee and try to get Owen to understand how important we feel it is to get the numbers that we need.
I agree. Just one comment. There seems to be a lack of transparency here.
Yeah, that transportation, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, a lack of transparency from DARTS to transportation. We're not
Yeah.
getting the information. And with all due respect to Paul, I know she's a charmer. And she can get what she needs. It needs to be done properly.
Now, one of the problems is, I don't want to accuse anybody of doing this on purpose, but Mark might be giving numbers that ATS wouldn't support, that they would say is inaccurate. That's the only flaw that I saw going directly to darts.
But I sent the numbers to Owen and he said they were right.
Okay. Are you okay if we talk about it at transportation?
I have no problem at all. I mean, it wasn't even my idea. I didn't come up with this proposal, so.
Yeah, that sounds a little.
We could almost read
Okay, almost, no,
It's just that, you know, when I ask him for the figures, he sits there at his computer and gives me right then and then. Where Owen, I have to wait a week. That was all.
I just,
So it doesn't matter to me, one way or the other, so.
we'll discuss it.
Yeah, we'll talk about it at the committee meeting. So we have like 3 minutes, and I apologize, we started the meeting a little bit late today, and I don't usually do that. Mary, you had 2 things that you wanted to talk about. Do you want to do one of them and keep it under 3 minutes?
Oh, I had a wish, just a second.
One was socialization, and the other one was AODA counselors.
Oh, yeah, the other was a report of ODA
So
responsibilities.
pick one, and we'll do the other one next meeting. Or do you want to do both of them in July?
Well, as I said, the social isolation can be in the future big time.
Okay.
The announcement was last Saturday was all, but the federal government is giving money to 10 organizations for 3 years to look at the situation.
Okay.
And they're saying it's just for seniors. But let's face it, people, seniors have disabilities. So they're gonna have social isolation too.
Could we get a copy of that circulated by email? Of what it was
Release from the federal government.
Okay.
And I thought I heard Loren say that that meeting that Sam Marola said he was going to set up to educate council about AODA hasn't happened.
Should we put that on the agenda for July?
Well, we can rattle his cage, but he might not be around.
I'll speak to the council.
Okay.
I'll speak to the council.
Tim?
Do you know where the session is that's supposed to be going on immediately after this?
Orientation.
Orientation.
I thought it was
Supposed to be right here.
Are you staying too?
Yeah, we are.
There's 4 of us then, Paula, myself, and Vicki.
I thought it was in this room.
I thought it was 2.
Okay.
Okay. Motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Tim? Oh, it has to be.
See, I'm not, she beat me to it.
Paula, seconded by Bob, because he couldn't keep his hand up fast enough. All in favor? Carried.
Thank you, everyone.